Welcome friends to the Secret Doctrine webinar. This is our last class in the series. We are going to finish with stanza 6 today, and we are going to explore stanza 7 in a future series. So in stanza 6 we see the formation of worlds, of different planets where evolution is going to take place. And in this part of the stanza 6, in the second part, we will see more specifically the evolution of Earth at this particular cycle in which we are at right now. But before we get there, we still have one more shloka of the general teaching about the formation of planets. So we will continue with the shloka 4 that says, He, Fohat, builds them, the planets, in the likeness of all their wheels, or worlds, placing them on the imperishable centers. How does Fohat build them? He collects the fiery dust, he makes them balls of fire, runs through them and round them, infusing life thereinto, then sets them in motion, some one, some the other way. They are cold, he makes them hot. They are dry, he makes them moist. They shine, he fans and cools them. Thus acts Fohat from one twilight to the other during 7 eternities. So let's explore this shloka little by little. First we have that he builds them in the likeness of all their wheels, and Blavatsky puts in parentheses worlds, placing them on the imperishable centers. And she explains, the worlds are built in the likeness of all their wheels, that is, those that existed in preceding Manvantaras and went into Pralaya. It is an everlasting work of perfection with every new appearance. But the substance, matter, and forces are all one and the same. So I think this part of the shloka is trying to bring a sense of continuity. So the new planets are a continuation of all their planets, of all their evolutions. They are built in the likeness of the previous ones. But as Blavatsky says here, they are not identical. Each new wheel, each new world that is developed in the process of evolution is a little higher or a little more perfect, or it's more able to express the spontaneous original perfection that exists in the absolute reality. So at the same time, she says substance, matter, and forces are all one and the same, but here again, they are the same at the level of the essence, because after every Manvantara comes the period of rest, Pralaya, where everything is dissolved and goes back to the root of substance, or the root substance that Blavatsky sometimes called Mula Prakriti. And that root substance is the source of all the different evolutionary cycles and the cosmos that appears. However, how matter is differentiated and developed, and the kind of forces and the kind of consciousness that can express through it keeps on evolving, so that, as I said, they become better fit vehicles of the expression of perfection. Now, Fohat places the new worlds on the imperishable centers. And Blavatsky explains that these imperishable Laya centers have a great importance, and their meaning must be fully understood if we would have a clear conception of the archaic cosmogony. The worlds are built neither upon, nor over, nor in the Laya centers, the 0 point being a condition, not any mathematical point. So in her discussions about the concepts of the secret doctrine, you can see that Blavatsky had a difficult time trying to explain what a Laya center is, because it is a very abstract concept. She said the Laya centers are not points in space on which or around which or in which you build the worlds. The Laya centers are, as we said, a state of non-differentiation, a state of matter which develops into the differentiated worlds. So it's difficult to talk about them because when we talk about a center, we immediately place that center in a particular point in space. And although that is true on the three-dimensional space that we know on the physical plane, although the planet will appear in some particular place, the Laya center is really a state of matter that is available anywhere in the universe. It's not that it's in one particular center or in the other. In the place where the planet will be developed is where matter comes out of that Laya state into a differentiated state. And where the new world is going to be developed is determined by Fohat. Fohat is the one that at this point differentiates matter so that the new world or solar system or whatever it is develops. Now Blavatsky explains how a new planetary chain is formed. Remember, as we saw in the first sentence, the new planetary chain is built in the likeness of a previous one. So it does not come out of nothing. It's not created independently of whatever happened in the past. And now Blavatsky is going to talk a little about how the new planetary chain is created in connection to the previous one, from which this one can be thought of as a reincarnation. So she says that Fohat guides the transfer of the principles from one planet to the other, from one star to another child star. When a planet dies, its informing principles are transferred to a Laya or sleeping center with potential but latent energy in it, which is thus awakened into life and begins to form itself into a new sidereal body. So there is here the idea that there is a planet or a star or a system that dies, and all the principles that composed that now dead body, and by principles we mean from an esoteric point of view, not only the physical principle but also the vital principle, what we could call the emotional principle or the mental principle. All these principles are transferred to another Laya center or a set of centers where the new system is going to be built. So this new system, as I said, can be regarded as a reincarnation of the previous one. And all this, of course, is explained in an allegorical way. We can see a diagram that was designed for this. So we see here the lunar chain. In the theosophical view, it is said that the moon was a planet on its own in the past. The esoteric philosophy doesn't accept the idea that the moon came out of the mass of the earth when the earth was being formed. So the moon was a planet that was associated to 7 other globes. So the moon would be this lower globe, globe D, and then it had associated 6 other globes on different planes of perception. When this moon, the evolution on the moon finishes, then the moon transfers the principles to what will become a new planet which in this case is the Earth. And each one of the globes transfer their principles to the new planetary chain. So for example, in the last round of evolution of the lunar chain, when evolution finishes on globe A, then there is a transfer of principles to what will become, after Pralaya in the future, will become the globe A of the new planetary chain, the Earth chain. So evolution now is on the lunar chain is going on globe B. When that evolution is over, then the principles are transferred to the Laia center that will become the future globe B. And then evolution now is on globe C, and just like that, the principles are transferred from globe to globe after the evolution in that particular globe finishes. So at the end of the last round of evolution on the lunar chain, we have that all the Laia centers for the different globes of the future planetary chain have the principles of the previous planets or the previous globes in the other planetary chain. Now, what does it mean to transfer the principle? We probably cannot really conceive what that is. Blavatsky explains in The Secret Doctrine that the principles and energy of the previous globes are transferred to the new planetary chain. And this is the second way. Remember that in the previous class we said that the phrase the wheels giving birth to new wheels could be interpreted in two ways. This is the second way in which that statement can be interpreted, that the wheels in the previous planetary chain give rise or birth to the wheels in the new planetary chain. So that is one of the ways to interpret that. And the other was that when the Manvantara begins for the evolutionary of the planetary the Earth planetary chain begins, then globe A is first developed out of these latent principles that are in the Laia center, and then as evolution goes on globe A we can say emanates globe B. Globe B begins to be formed from the activity that takes place in globe A. So we can say that A gives birth to B. These are the two ways in which we can interpret that phrase. One is interplanetary interpretation, and the other is intraplanetary interpretation, if we talk about the planetary chain. So then the next part of the shloka says, how does Fohat build the globes, the worlds? And it is explained. He collects the fiery dust. He makes balls of fire, runs through them and round them, infusing life thereinto. Then sets them in motion, some one, the other, some the other way. They are cold, he makes them hot. They are dry, he makes them moist. They shine, he fans and cools them. This again resembles what modern science explains in the stages of the formation of planets. For example, the planetary formation in modern science is explained that everything begins with a shapeless cloud of dust and gas. They are like a nebula. At some point there is a certain disturbance that in science they don't know how this disturbance happens or what really happens, but then there is a disturbance that makes all that dust that was spread out collapse in the center. So we could say from an esoteric point of view that this is when Fohat begins to work. The nebula is still there before the Manvantara for that system really begins. So when the period of activity on the physical plane begins, then that cloud of dust and gas begins to collapse in the center. This is because FOHAT becomes active and produces this collapse. And it collapses into a sphere. As the center becomes more and more compressed, it becomes hotter. So FOHAT, the activity of FOHAT that makes the matter come together, generates heat and makes them hotter. Then the cloud begins to rotate and little by little becomes a flat disk. So again, how does this rotation start is not really understood. There is the idea that by the motion of converging to the center, then a little rotation begins to be formed. But again, from the esoteric point of view, this rotation is simply the result of the activity of FOHAT. Then when we have the flat disk, that is where all the different planets will begin to form and in the center the sun, so these little planets begin to aggregate in the disk at different distances from the center. They begin to aggregate and fall fiery balls of gas and molten liquid. So they become fiery balls, as the shloka says. And then there is a process of cooling and condensation into solid form, which again, one may think that at some point the heat will be exhausted, and this is the reason why there is a cooling and condensation of the planet. But from the esoteric point of view, all this is the result of the activity of FOHAT. So in general, if we look at this on general lines, we can see that there is a certain resemblance. Now it is interesting to see that in the shloka, it is said that FOHAT sets these fiery balls into motion, some in one and some in the other direction. This is also interesting because if the rotation of the planets came simply as a natural result of the motion of compression and the rotation of the whole cloud, one would expect that all the planets rotate in the same direction, that all the rotations are similar. But here the shloka says that FOHAT begins to make the planets rotate in different directions. And this is actually what we see in the solar system. For example, we see that Mercury and Jupiter rotate in this direction that we could call anti-clock direction. Then Venus goes in the opposite direction, but both of their axes are straight, are upright. Then the Earth, Mars, Saturn and Neptune have their axes tilted and they rotate in the same direction as Mercury and Jupiter. Now Uranus rotates in a completely different direction. The axis is almost horizontal from the point of view that we are considering this. And then you see that the rotation is completely different. So how does this happen if the rotation is a natural result of just the motion of the whole nebula as it compresses? Well, in science they try to say that maybe when the planet was being developed, there was some kind of asteroid that hit the mass and set the planet to rotate in an opposite direction. But that is quite difficult to believe. It's the only explanation so far that can be given from a scientific point of view. But that doesn't certainly seem quite okay, because when the planets are moving, are forming, either they are not yet very solid, so an impact of an asteroid would produce what they think that happened with the moon, that part of the material was ejected from the planet in formation, Or if the planet is already solid, then an impact that was strong enough to reverse the rotation would probably destroy the planet or produce a big chunk of the planet to break off. So the way that science explains it right now to me is not very convincing. And what, from the esoteric point of view, it is said is that there is an independent force that makes these planets rotate in different ways for each one of them. And that is where it differs from the regular scientific view. Now, when talking about Fohat, Blavatsky says that Fohat has 7 sons who are his brothers, and he is forced to be born time after time whenever any 2 of his son brothers indulge in too close contact, whether an embrace or a fight. To avoid this, he binds together and unites those of unlike nature and separates those of similar temperaments. So first, there is this idea that Fohat has 7 sons who are also his brothers. This is part of the language of the esoteric philosophy, where Fohat as a synthetic force on a higher plane is the origin of a series of differentiated forces on the lower plane. But then Fohat itself on the lower plane becomes an effect and becomes like a brother in the sense of being on the same level of action of the other differentiations. This is similar to what we explained before, that the goddess is seen as the mother of the Logos, as the wife of the Logos, and then as the daughter of the Logos. Because depending on the plane that we are looking at, the relationship of the feminine principle to the masculine changes. So similarly here, depending on what plane we are looking at, Fohat is the father, the origin of a series of differentiated forces, or is at the same time, on a lower plane, one of those differentiated forces. So Blavatsky explains a little that the 7 sons brothers of Fohat represent and personify the 7 forms of cosmic magnetism, called in practical occultism the 7 radicals, whose cooperative and active progeny are, among other energies, electricity, magnetism, sound, light, heat, cohesion, etc. So the idea is that on a lower plane, the differentiations of Fohat are all these different forces. We know electricity is an expression on the physical plane of Fohat. Also magnetism, we call these 2 effects the electromagnetic force, because in science has come to recognize that electricity and magnetism are connected. They are certainly 2 different forces from a certain point of view, but they always go together. They are connected. So this is part of the idea that all these forces derive from Fohat. Same thing with cohesion, for example. At the molecular level, that the molecules tend to come next to the other, that is an effect of the forces that are playing at the level, the electromagnetic forces that are playing at the level of the atoms. So the force of cohesion is also another form of electromagnetism, therefore derives from Fohat. Heat also is a kind of oxidation. This oxidation is also an expression of the intra-atomic forces, let's say. In modern science, we talk about the nuclear forces, which some years ago, the strong and the weak nuclear forces were thought to be different from electromagnetism. And now science is coming to see that they are also expressions of electromagnetism. So little by little, all these different forces are being traced back to electromagnetism, which, as Blavatsky says, is the representative of Fohat on the physical plane. It is interesting that Blavatsky mentions here sound, because sound is not an electromagnetic wave. Sound seems to have a different nature from, for example, light. However, from an esoteric point of view, Blavatsky may not be referring to the physical effect of or manifestation of sound. Remember that sound was connected in the shlokas earlier with the activity of Akasha. Akasha is the source of sound. And Akasha is behind the manifestation of many other forces. Actually, Akasha is regarded as a magical medium through which the forces of the universe work. So maybe even if on the physical plane sound is a wave, according to what science says at the moment, is a wave in the air, and therefore is not an electromagnetic wave. If we take a step back, what the origin of sound is on the inner planes, that seems to come also from Akasha and on the material aspect, and Fohat on the energy aspect of the principles we are talking about. So all these are different manifestations of Fohat on the physical plane. And Blavatsky says that where Fohat is reborn whenever some of his son's brothers come too close into contact, because that may produce friction, for example. If two particles come too close, that produces friction, which is a result of the electrostatic and electromagnetic forces. Or if they go too far apart, that also may bring Fohat into birth. We know at the level of the quarks, for example, that the quarks cannot be separated indefinitely, because as we separate them, there is a binding force that appears, that is born. So perhaps what this explanation is talking about is this effect, that in the interaction of matter, Fohat is constantly being born and regulating the activity. And according to this explanation, it is Fohat the reason why those elements of unlike nature tend to be attracted, and those of similar nature tend to be separated. This is especially true with magnetism, where the different poles attract and the similar poles repel each other. So this part is a little explanation of how Fohat works and how it's been constantly being born again through the interaction of matter. Now Blavatsky explains that with these verses, with this shloka that we just read, ends the part or the portion of the stanzas which relates to the universal cosmogony after the last Mahapralaya or universal destruction, which when it comes sweeps out the space of space every differentiated thing, gods as atoms, like so many dry leaves. From this verse onwards, the stanzas are concerned only with our solar system in general, with the planetary chains therein, inferentially, and with the history of our globe, the fourth and its chain, especially. All the stanzas and verses which follow in this book 1 refer only to the evolution of and on our earth. So basically she's saying that while the previous shlokas could be applied in a more universal way to how the universe comes about after the Mahapralaya, after the complete destruction of or dissolution of the cosmos, the stanzas and the shlokas that we are going to read from now on are applied more specifically to the earth and to the evolution of earth. So after this fourth shloka comes the fifth. Now the fifth shloka seems to be out of place. Blavatsky herself recognizes that in the sequence of the shlokas that she gave us, the fifth one it feels to be out of place. But she says that was necessary to place it there so that we can keep a certain continuity. To me, that shloka is talking about something that is going to happen later with the incarnation of the monads. So what I'm doing, I'm keeping that shloka to be examined in our next series when we talk about the appearance of humanity on earth. So we will skip shloka 5. Maybe in the sequence of shlokas that the book of Sian has, that shloka had its place, but as Blavatsky said several times, she didn't translate all the shlokas. She chose some shlokas and some stanzas to translate. So maybe because of that, in what we have, it looks like out of place. In any way, we can continue with the shloka 6, which talks about, as we said, about the earth in its 4 evolutionary round. So from what the shloka 4 was talking about, that was the general formation of the solar system, the general formation of the first planetary chains, up to this point that shloka 6 is talking about, there is a vast period of time, and as Blavatsky will explain. So let's read the shloka. The older wheels rotated downward and upward. The mother's spawn filled the whole cosmos. There were battles fought between the creators and the destroyers, and battles fought for space, the seed appearing and reappearing continuously. So HPB explains, between this shloka and the last, shloka 4, in this same stanza, extend long ages, and there now gleams the dawn and sunrise of another eon, another evolutionary period. The drama enacted on our planet is at the beginning of its 4th act. So evolution went around the Earth planetary chain 3 times already, and now is in its 4th round of evolution, which is the period in which we are at right now. So let's see, the shloka begins saying, the older wheels rotated downward and upward. And Blavatsky explains, the phrase older wheels refers to the worlds or globes of our chain as they were during the previous rounds. So remember, we have the rounds, the planetary chain with the 7 globes, and the older wheels, the previous evolutionary cycles, rotated down and up. Remember, that is like a U-shape evolution. So down to the earth and up to the back to the highest globe. And then she says, the present stanza refers to the evolution of those countless globes which evolve after a periodical pralaya, rebuilt from the old material into new forms. Remember that the earth, the planetary chain of the earth, was rebuilt from the principles that animated the previous planetary chain that the moon belonged to. So she says the previous globes disintegrate and reappear transformed and perfected for a new phase of life. So the evolution on Earth is of a higher level than the evolution that that took place on the moon. And then when the idea is that when the Earth finishes its evolution, the same will happen. The planet will die and its principles will be transferred to other Laia centers to build a new planet, and then the Earth will become the moon of that, the satellite of that new planet. In that new planet, a new evolution will begin, evolution that will be higher than the evolution on Earth. Now she shows a little diagram that I wanted to bring so that you can see it, about the planetary chains and the position of these globes within the different planes. So we already saw this to some extent, but it is here that she introduces this particular diagram. In the Secret Doctrine, she compares the planetary chain, as this is explained by the esoteric philosophy, with the Sephiroth in the Tree of Life, to show that there is a certain resemblance. But we don't need to go into that. Let's examine this diagram. She shows the first, second, and third planes, which she says these are the three higher planes of the septenary cosmos. They are divine and formless world of spirit. So she frequently says that there are hierarchies of beings, there may be different realms on these different planes, but they are all far beyond our speculation. So she just said nothing can be really explained about these higher planes. We regard them as the formless worlds of spirit. Then on the lower four planes, we have our planetary chain. On the highest of them, Blavatsky calls it the archetypal world. And she's using these words because in the Kabbalah, these four lower planes, she's comparing these four lower planes with the four worlds in the Kabbalah. So she says the highest plane among these four lower is the archetypal world. So globe A and G, if we put letters to these seven globes, you see we have the lowest of them all, that is the physical world, as we are going to see. So globes A and G are on the same planet, and they are archetypal, meaning that they have the seed, the prototypes, the plan of what is going to be fully expressed in a concrete form on the physical plane. So the globes A and G are globes that could be said to be intellectual globes. Intellectual in the sense that Plato would talk about, this is the world where the original forms are, from which the things that exist on our world will be a shadow or a copy or a concrete expression. Then the next worlds are on the intellectual, not so much in the Platonic sense, but more in the Kabbalistic sense. So first we have the archetypal, which is what Plato would call the intellectual or intelligible world. Then we have the intellectual or creative world, more from the Kabbalistic point of view, which is where those ideas, those abstract ideas, begin to be expressed. So this is where creation begins, so to say. Then we have two worlds. In the substantial or formative world, this is where the creation begins to take a primitive, a primal form, a kind of, let's say, malleable form. This is on the plane that we would call the astral plane. And finally, we have the physical material world, where we have the physical planets. So globe D in our chain would be the Earth. This is the diagram that Blavatsky produces in the Secret Doctrine. Now, the shloka says there were battles fought between the creators and the destroyers, and battles fought for space, the seed appearing and reappearing continuously. Remember that we said in a previous stanza, when we were looking at the formation, the early formation of the solar system and the planets, that the sun was the eighth rejected. That there was at some point in the evolution of the cosmos, there was the danger that the planets, the planets that were in a process of being formed, could be absorbed by the mass of the sun, so that a new law had to come into operation, separating the influence of the sun so that the planets could be formed. So that is one of the battles for space. But there are many other battles for space when, even in the scientific view, as we are going to see, when the planets begin to be formed, we have what they call planetesimals, little nucleus starting all over the flat disk that is the solar system at the time, and they start a war, allegorically speaking, where one is crashing into the other, one is trying to assimilate or absorb another, and in this aggregation, those planetesimals begin to grow and eventually become a planet. So this is part of the fights that for space that these planets fought. And Blavatsky explains, here the seed, because the shloka says the seed appearing and reappearing continuously, here the seed stands for the world germ, viewed by science as material particles in a highly attenuated condition, but in occult physics as spiritual particles, that is, supersensuous matter existing in a state of primeval differentiation. So basically, what science called the primordial dust and gas, the esoteric philosophy says that behind that, the gas and dust is a manifestation of, in its primeval differentiation, of a spiritual substance. And then she says, in theogony, every seed is an ethereal organism from which evolves later on a celestial being, a god. So remember that we said that the planets are the physical body, or we could look at the planets as the physical body of a planetary spirit. So all this process of creating the physical planet is more or less like the period of gestation of a fetus that will become the body for a soul. So in a similar way, the seeds, the spiritual seeds that are behind this dust and gas that we see as inert matter, the spiritual seed behind is the seed of what will become a planetary spirit or a celestial being. So the secret doctrine is constantly bringing the two levels together, the level of physical matter that science can explore and understand to some extent, and the spiritual counterpart that this has. So when we see a nebula in the sky, in the cosmos, we are seeing the physical matter, which a divine being is a planetary spirit, or if it is a nebula for a whole solar system, the physical matter that a logos is guiding to generate a physical vehicle for the expression of this divine consciousness. So it's never only physical and chemical reactions and activity that is going on there. And then Blavatsky brings up some commentaries to the stanzas that are added to the stanzas in the original book of Xian, Fohat caused the universe to move with circular motion. We already discussed this in previous classes. As Plato has it, or as the occult teaching expresses it, the central sun causes Fohat to collect primordial dust into the form of balls, to impel them to move in converging lines, and finally to approach each other and aggregate. The central sun is the spirit of the sun. The idea is that the sun that we see, again, is the physical body of the Logos, and the Logos, the consciousness, is the central sun. So remember that from the Logos come the primordial seven, that are the seven Logoi, and from them come Fohat. So it is the Logos, the one that, the central sun, that causes Fohat to do all this work that we have been discussing, bringing together in the form of balls all this primordial matter and activate them, aggregate them, and set in motion the formation of the planet. And then in this commentary to the Book of Xian, there is a brief description again of this process. Being scattered in space without order or system, so that would be the stage of the nebula that is shapeless, the world germs come into frequent collision until their final aggregation. So they begin to aggregate in all these different bodies. After which they become wanderers, and Blavatsky says comets. Now Blavatsky is using the word comets in a more general way. These wanderers are the stages of differentiation when there are particles or small aggregations of particles that are just flying through space, even perhaps within the nebula, where before they generate a true orbit around a central nucleus, before they start to form a planetesimal, for example. So the first is the aggregation, and that aggregation generates a motion which is not yet circular. And this is the beginning of the action of Fohat. So that is the wanderer's stage. Then the battles and struggle begin. The older bodies attract the younger, while others repel them. Many perish, devoured by the stronger companions. Those that escape become worlds. So this is what I was explaining about the planetesimals. And this again has some resemblance to the scientific view. Let me read something taken from the scientific view. Self-accretion, which is when it begins to collapse, of cosmic dust accelerates the growth of the particles into boulder-sized planetesimals. The more massive planetesimals accrete some smaller ones, while others shatter in collisions. When the bodies reach sizes of approximately 1 kilometer, then they can attract each other directly through their mutual gravity, enormously aiding further growth into moon-sized protoplanets. So you see here also the fights, the struggle between all these particles is explained, how they attract each other. Some are assimilated, some are shattered in collisions, and little by little, those who survive become protoplanets, which have a good chance of becoming real planets. So in a scientific language, this is quite similar to what the commentary to the Book of Xian was saying. And this commentary, Blavatsky says, comes from thousands of years ago, far before we even had civilization as we know it. Now, Blavatsky, because in the previous text, science says that gravity is helping this process of accretion, of collapsing. I'm bringing from the Secret Doctrine commentaries just a brief a brief reference to that. And Blavatsky says, there is such a thing as attraction and repulsion, and in occultism, it stands in the place of gravity, the scientific teachings about which we reject. So Blavatsky was always very vocal in her rejection of gravity, not the effect that we call gravity, but she says what produces the effect that we call gravity is the action of the attraction and repulsion, not what science thinks that gravity is. You know, science thinks that gravity is a force of its own, and they are trying to find this force. I already mentioned this in a previous class, that they are trying to find in the quantic view of the universe. Every force has a particle that is the carrier of that force, a subatomic particle. So they are looking for the graviton. If gravity exists as a force, there has to be a particle that carries that force. And that would be what they call the graviton. And so far, all attempts at trying to find the graviton have failed. And gravity is a real problem within quantum physics, and it's also one of the main reasons why the two theories that explain the universe right now, which is the theory of relativity of Einstein and the quantum physics theory, these two theories are incompatible, basically because of the problem of gravity. We can look, if we simplify what Einstein theory of relativity is, we can say that it's a theory of gravity. Gravity as a function of space. And then the quantum physics is incompatible with this. Now, if there is a reformulation of what gravity is in terms of perhaps electromagnetic forces, then there would be no contradiction between two theories. Einstein theory of relativity would be reformulated in a way that is compatible with the quantum physics. And then the next shloka says, make thy calculations, all anew, if thou wouldst learn the correct age of thy small wheel, the chain. Its fourth spoke is our mother, the earth. Reach the fourth fruit of the fourth path of knowledge that leads to nirvana, and thou shalt comprehend, for thou shalt see. So let's see the comments on this. Thy small wheel, which fourth spoke is our mother, as Blavatsky said in the parenthesis that she added to the shloka, the small wheel is our chain of spheres, the planetary chain, and the fourth spoke is our earth, the fourth in the chain, which is the globe D, the physical one. It is one of those on which the hot or positive breath of the sun has a direct effect. So because the earth is physical, the breath of the sun, the physical breath of the sun has an effect on the globe. That is a reference to the plane in which the earth is. Then the shloka said, make thy calculations, all anew, if thou wouldest learn the correct age of the earth. And then Blavatsky says, to calculate its age, however, as the pupil is asked to do in the stanza, is rather difficult, since we are not given the figures of the great kalpa, the figures of how long the evolution on the planetary chain is, and are not allowed to publish those of our small yugas. Yugas, she's using a Sanskrit word for smaller cycles that take place within our planet. So she says we are not allowed to publish the figures of our small yugas except as to the approximate duration of these. When talking about chronology, Blavatsky said that the Hindu chronology was close enough to the esoteric chronology, or the esoteric numbers of the duration of the Earth. But she says, I'm not allowed to say the true length of our cycles of evolution, and we are not allowed even to know the real duration of the whole evolution of the planetary chain. There is a writing, I think it is in the Mahatma letters that came from Blavatsky's teachers, where one of the masters say that if the correct numbers in the cycles of evolution are known, that could give the key to understand how psychology works, because we are very much connected to the cycles of nature, and that could allow people to learn how to manipulate the minds of other people. So there is a reason why the true numbers cannot be given publicly. So we only have approximate numbers, which may serve to have a sense of the scale of years that we are talking about, as we are going to see. So Blavatsky goes on and says, we have no knowledge at what time precisely the evolution and formation of our little Earth began. Therefore, it is impossible to calculate its age, unless the time of its birth is given, which the teachers refuse to do so far. Now, later in her life, Blavatsky wrote an article that was never published, it wasn't even finished, where she tried to provide some numbers for the evolution of the different cycles. If we look closely at the numbers, they are not quite compatible with other numbers that she gave in other occasions. So even these numbers are probably not quite accurate, but we can use them to have a general sense of what kind of cycles we are talking about. So normally, she said that the total length of the evolution on the planetary chain of Earth, the 7 rounds around the 7 globes to which our Earth belongs, takes 4,320,000 million years. 4,320,000,000 years. That is how much the whole evolution of our Earth, how long it lasts. Then within this we have the 7 rounds. She says that the first round lasted about 154 million years. The second round 300 million years. And our fourth round, that is when the round we are right now at the moment, will last 617 million years. Now she says this is the duration of the whole fourth round. Now, because there is a pralaya after each period of activity that lasts as long as the period of activity, if we want to know for how long life is active in the planetary chain in one particular round, we have to divide that number in 2. So she says that the period of activity in this node of the fourth round is of 300 million years. And then the whole system spends another 300 million years in West, in Pralaya. So you see, this is how long, according to these teachings, the Earth will last. Again, it is not clear if this means the Earth as a planet or life evolving on Earth. If this is part of, this is counted when life begins to evolve on Earth, not all the previous time that it took for the Earth to be formed. Because when do we say that the Earth begins, what day, what year? We say, well, before it was not the Earth, now it is the Earth. So all this, we can only take it in a vague way, just to have an impression in our mind of how long these cosmic cycles are. Now she provided other numbers. She talked about the duration of humanity on each of the planets within this fourth round. Remember, there is one round of evolution, a second, a third. Now we are in the fourth round. How long is humanity inhabiting each one of the different globes on this fourth round? So she says humanity is on planet A for 11 million years. Then on B for 22 million years. Then if we jump to the Earth, that is planet D, humanity will be on Earth for 44 million years. Now humanity begins, or by humanity we mean, as we are going to see in the next series, not just physical humanity, but previous cycles of evolution also, where humanity was still not physical. Everything develops in nature gradually, from the spiritual into the physical, and from the physical back into the spiritual. So humanity started far before we can see any trace of physical humanity on Earth. So the idea is that within this cycle of activity of 300 million years that the fourth round takes, humanity evolves on Earth for 44 million years. Now, before we go on, let me say that Blavatsky said that in some other of her writings that the physical humanity on Earth began 18 million years ago. That at the level of science we don't know that, because all the fossils, the very few fossils that may remain from the very early humanity are under the sea, under the ocean, because in the theosophical view there is a shift of continents with each new evolutionary cycle of humanity. We are in the fifth evolutionary cycle, which is called a root race, and humanity was physical in the previous evolutionary cycle. In the fourth, the main continent is said to be the Atlantis, which is now under the Atlantic Ocean. Previously to that, there was another evolutionary cycle, the third, in which humanity also was physical. And so from that point up to this, Blavatsky says, the time elapsed was around 18 million years. Previously, there were two further cycles which were not physical. So we could think that we have been on Earth already half of this time, around 20 million years, and that there is left more or less around the same time. Now remember that all these figures are not necessarily very accurate. The idea is to have a general sense of the cosmic time that evolution takes. And finally, the last part of the sloka said, reach the fourth fruit of the fourth path of knowledge that leads to nirvana, and thou shalt comprehend, that for thou shalt see. And Blavatsky explains that, connects this idea of the four paths to nirvana with the idea of initiation. She says, there are four grades of initiation mentioned in exoteric works, which are known respectively in Sanskrit as Shrotapana, Sagardagan, Anagamin, and Arhan. The four paths to nirvana, in these are fourth round, hearing the same appellations. So what she says is that when she talked about initiation within the context of the esoteric philosophy, initiation as an evolutionary stage of the soul, not so much the initiations that we can get from different organizations, from Freemasonry or from in Hinduism or in Buddhism. These are more occult kind of initiations that happen to the soul. She says that there are 4 grades of initiation that lead to nirvana, and that the shloka says that only after attaining the 4th initiation, the initiate can really know all these numbers, for he or she shall see. So it is with the attainment of the 4th initiation that all these numbers, the true numbers, can be known. Now she says that the Arhan, which is the 4th initiation, is not the last initiation. She says the Arhan, though he can see the past, the present and the future, is not yet the highest initiate. For the adept himself, this Arhan, the initiated candidate, becomes now a chela or a pupil to a higher initiate. 3 further higher grades have to be conquered by the Arhan, who would reach the apex, the ladder of Arhatship. So in Blavatsky's view, there are 4 initiations that lead a person to nirvana, that lead a person to be able to see the past, the present, and the future. That brings that person to what we normally call liberation. But there are 3 further stages of initiation that can be attained by that consciousness, which would complete what she calls the ladder of Arhatship. So it is said that her teachers were initiates of the higher initiations beyond the Arhat initiation, or at least that is what seems to be implied in Blavatsky's writings. So all these numbers, to close with this is the last part of the shloka and the stanza 6. All these numbers are given just for us to have a general view, and they will be known by the initiate when the initiate is beyond the realm of time, and therefore he can see the past, the present, and the future. Thank you for participating, and I hope to see you in our next series.